Welcome to Ecclesia Principles, a biblical strategy for believers to engage in God's design for government with Ray Eppard.
Hello, glad you could join us again today. We're continuing to examine some things about the year of Jubilee in regard to our Ecclesia principle that we've entitled Understanding Justice and Equality on a Societal Scale. Now, again, it is very different if you're just looking at two people and justice, equality there. That's a very easy thing. It's easier to understand, and it's easier to know what policies should be in there. But when you look on a societal level, at that point, you have children and grandchildren who've been affected by the decisions of their parents and their grandparents. You have just life happening. You know, we live in a fallen world. There are things that happen. You know, there are catastrophes. They are not acts of God, even though that's what insurance companies call them. They're not acts of God, but bad things just happen to good people in this world because it's a fallen world. And as a result of that, that can create disadvantages. It can create disadvantages. And God set into place the year of Jubilee to help offset some of that. And the rules that governed it between those years of Jubilee, how it would function. God set that in place. And it was designed ultimately so that people would not be oppressed. Now, we've looked more at the side of people not being oppressed because we're talking about understanding justice and equality on a societal scale. Now, I want to flip it and stop talking about equality as much, and I want to go back a little bit to the justice aspect in this. Because where is the justice in the year of Jubilee? Where is the justice in the debts being canceled? Where is the justice in, this person, they had to give up their farm, they had to give up their home, and now they get it back? Where is the justice in all that? Where's the justice to the person that got it? And I want to look at that today. So let's go ahead and read verses 14 and 15 of Leviticus 25. And if you sell anything to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor's hand, you shall not oppress one another. According to the number of years after the Jubilee, you shall buy from your neighbor, and according to the number of years of crops, he shall sell to you. Here, God is telling them this is the overarching view of how things will be handled between these years of Jubilee. The years of Jubilee were every 50 years. It's not like we're talking about every 5 years. It was every 50 years. So if you would, in a manner of speaking, what we're talking about is a once-in-a-lifetime situation. It could be that somebody would experience two, but for the most part, it's going to be a once-in-a-lifetime. Now, they might be 3 years old on the first one, experience two, but as an adult, they're probably only going to experience 1 year of Jubilee. And so with this, again, where is the justice? In this case, we'll call it for the lender. In other words, this person over here has had a financial difficulty. Their barn burned down, their crops burned down, they lost their livestock, they don't have, they've spent their money to create, to pay everything that they can and to survive, but now they've run out of that and they don't have options. Well, this person over here, the way God had set it up is, he said, you can't go in and buy it. They need to have ownership. We talked about that yesterday. Ownership is extremely important to stop oppression. And that's one of the biggest things that concerns me economically in our nation today, is the increase of renters, the percentage of renters. Not that there's anything wrong with renting, but that people will live and die and never own. That's more the issue, that's more the concern. Because without ownership, oppression tends to increase. Oppression tends to increase. Now, with that, what happens to this person? They come in and they give them the money. But if they don't have it paid off by the year of Jubilee, then the debt's forgiven. Let's say they don't give them the land. They just say, hey, I need money to buy crops this year, to buy seed for the crops and so forth, and to build my barn back. Will you loan that to me? So they loan it to them. In that sense, by that point in time, when the next Jubilee comes, debt's forgiven. How is that just to the lender? Because we're talking about understanding justice and equality on a societal scale. On a societal scale. You see, on an individual scale, no, it would not be just for them to not be paid. That would not be. But there's a principle here that God is instituting. And at this point, that principle puts a responsibility on the lender. God is saying, I'm going to protect this disadvantaged person over here. I want them to maintain ownership. I want them to have opportunity in the future. So you can lend to them, but on the next Jubilee, it's gone. What that does to the lender is makes him think twice about how much he's going to lend. How much he's going to lend. What will be, at that point, will he just lend the money for rebuilding the barn and to get through to the next harvest? Will he do that when he looks at that person and thinks about it? Is this a good investment? Are they likely going to be able to pay me back by that point in time? Or does he come back and say, well, I don't want to lend it to you, but, and they use the term here, buy. He says, you can buy the farm, but you're only buying the crops in reality. At that point, he looks and says, I don't want to lend that to you, but I tell you what I'll do. I will buy the place from you until the year of Jubilee, and with X amount of crops here, I will give you this amount of money for being able to harvest those crops, because there I can get my money. You get what you need to survive till the next Jubilee. At that point, it creates a responsibility for the lender to make decisions, not just, yeah, I'll lend it and then I will take it back from you and I'll do this. It protects the borrower, but it gives options to the lender. It also makes the lender understand there's a way I'm going to have to do this for this to work. And if it doesn't work, then I don't need to be doing it. And so at that point, they're able to set it up to where maybe they don't lend it. They buy the farm for the crops for those number of years, because there they can make the money. God isn't trying to keep the lender from getting their money. See, the purpose, again, was that there would not be oppression. That's the design. So God is not talking to that person saying, hey, you lend them money, well, you're just going to lose it. And some of that comes down to, what do you know about that person? If you look at them and you go, the year of Jubilee is coming up in 5 years. Knowing them, they won't pay me a dime until the year of Jubilee comes. No, I won't lend you the money, but I'll buy the crops. See, the thing of it is, God wasn't keeping the lender from getting the money. He wasn't stopping the justice, but he was forcing them to look at the process, to also look at how much they would lend. See, let me go into this. this is something that, again, it's amazing how little the news actually covers about the truth of things. But if you remember the housing crash back in, depends on who you talk to when it started, 06, 08 through 010, the Great Recession that was really caused by the housing collapse. Prior to that, there were loans, 100% loans, no money down, and I heard people, blaming the banks. As a matter of fact, virtually every politician blamed the banks. And at that point, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm not rich or anything, but I know some bankers, and I know some people with money, and I'm like, I don't think any of them would do that. I don't think any of them would just throw money away like that and in all honesty, make loans to people that they pretty much knew they couldn't pay them back. And so I actually spoke to a few people, and I started doing some reading because it didn't make sense to me. Well, come to find out, what had happened was actually in the last few months of President Clinton's term, his second term, last few months, he pushed Congress to pass some regulations, some laws, to require an increasing percentage of at-risk loans, that banks would be required to have a growing percentage of at-risk loans. And so that policy created the housing boom. But as the percentage increased of at-risk loans, then the percentage of defaults increased. And in order to create that percentage of at-risk loans, the offers had to get better and better in order to meet the regulations of the government. Well, we're not getting enough right now with requiring this much down and requiring that much down, so we have to nothing down. and in all honesty, so many things that had typically been a part of the system just went away because they were being required to have more and more at-risk loans. And ultimately, it was Bill Clinton's policies that created the Great Recession. It was his policies that ended up creating that. You see, the bottom line is people with money usually know how to handle money. And by God saying, listen, your Jubilee, that debt's going to be canceled, that makes this person over here think twice about how much they give, how they do it, because the bottom line is they're not going to be able to take the ownership. So it creates a little bit more of a balance. They can get, God's not keeping them from getting what is just and right, but He is putting a situation that if you go beyond what they are either capable of or have the character to do, you're going to lose it because of your choice. All God was doing was saying, you've got to understand here, and you better function within this. See, there was a cap on both ends to keep the oppression out. God bless you. Join us again tomorrow.